Welcome back to The Reason We Learn. I'm Deb Philman, mom, homeschooler, ex-teacher, and individualist. Do you remember what you were taught in elementary school about race or racism? Do you remember it? Now, granted, I'm older than many, but I was going to elementary school in the 1970s. In kindergarten, I was in Montessori school, and I didn't really specifically learn anything about race, but I did go to a mixed race school. I mean, my school was totally integrated. We had kids of every race, every walk of life you can imagine in that school. And we were not specifically taught to even notice our different races. I just now, in retrospect, know that we had kids of different races because I remember who they were. But we weren't taught anything about it. I had friends across the spectrum of socioeconomic levels and races, you name it, never gave it a second thought. Never gave it a second thought, even when I moved into regular public school and the situation was a little bit different. The school was not quite as diverse, but still didn't give it a second thought. Middle school, high school, things, as far as diversity in terms of representation improved. Now I wasn't giving it a second thought in terms of how I dealt with other people, except insofar as it was mentioned to me. Like if I said or did something ignorant, which thankfully I never did, but a couple people did to me. But it really didn't. It really just didn't come up. That doesn't mean I wasn't taught history. That doesn't mean I didn't learn about the 50s and 60s. It doesn't mean I didn't learn about the civil rights movement. I just learned about them when it was, I believe, age appropriate. So for example, in fourth grade, we had a little unit on the Civil War. I actually did a paper on it talking about the Civil War and talking about slavery. And I remember learning about slavery in a somewhat superficial way. Obviously that it was evil and terrible. And I was horrified as a kid to find out this had been the case here in this country. I had known slavery was a thing because growing up Jewish, we learned about it every Passover meal about slavery in Egypt. So I understood the concept of slavery. But then to find out it was in the country where I lived, it was horrifying, even in fourth grade. Even at the superficial level it was taught. Never once did my teacher or anybody else from fourth grade all the way through even high school say to me, but everything's better now. And that was in the 70s, 80s. Nobody ever said everything's all better. Nobody ever said, everybody's fine now, everybody's equal. Nope, never said anything like that. I don't know what your experience was. What was it? I'm curious. Do you remember it? But I'm going to guess that chances are you weren't taught that everything's fine, everything's wonderful, everybody's equal now. All right. And I don't know what they've taught in the last 10 years, but judging by my kids' former schools and things that I saw in schools when I was teaching, the brief period of time I was a classroom teacher, that also wasn't taught there, that everything is fine and everybody is equal. It just wasn't every day a focus on race and, segregating people, differentiating people by the color of their skin. So I come to a piece like this that starts off with, how do you teach anti-racism to the youngest students? And I don't begin to think about the answer to the question. I begin to think about the question behind that question that obviously was already answered, which is, should you? And somebody said yes. I'm wondering when that happened. I don't recall hearing about that, hearing that. As parents, were you asked? Did somebody say, do you think we should teach the youngest students about race in depth? Do you think that we should teach it as, this dichotomy that there's black and there's white, there's oppressors and oppressed. The country is still a zero-sum game. There are people who win and people who lose, and the people lose because the other people win. And if you're white, you're going to always be a step ahead. You always win. And if you're black, you always lose unless the white people get out of your way. I mean, this fixed pie, zero-sum thing. Were you ever asked about, should we do this with the youngest kids? I don't recall that. So somebody was asked at some point in time, and somebody decided, yes, we should do that. We should definitely do this. And then the question that should have followed before the how do you, if they've already decided we're going to, the next question should have been, okay, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence that doing this will have measurable benefit to the students? Because you see, the students go to school for themselves. The students go to school for themselves. We do not put kids, at least I would hope not, into school as parents for society. We don't we're not all Spartans. We don't hand over our kids to the greater society and go, please train my child to be part of the society and they're yours now. That's what they did in Sparta. You have a baby, belongs to the group. And they will be taught everything that benefits the group. That's what goes on in communist societies. That's what goes on in societies where the individual doesn't matter, where your individual child doesn't matter. Your child is just a product of your physical flesh that you hand over to the state and presumably belongs to the collective. But if that's not what you thought, if you thought, no, my child belongs to him or herself and maybe slightly to me until they're 18 in terms of I'm responsible to make sure they're okay and healthy and be able to launch and take care of themselves when they're 18 or 20 or 21 or now, of course, 26. This might be a shock to you that somebody somewhere would think that your child goes to school for any other purpose than to benefit him or herself and to learn skills that they will need to be successful in their individual life. But if you ask the question, how does this benefit my specific child, and you get anything back other than, well, this is going to teach them to read and do math and do science and so forth in a way that benefits them individually, and let me show you the data. If you get anything other than that answer, then guess what? They don't have an answer. And this isn't about your child. And this isn't about benefiting your child at all. But I'm guessing nobody even asked. I'm guessing that most parents didn't even know anything about this, that this was just decided in some room somewhere, and they just started to implement it, and now it becomes a discussion amongst educators and teachers and, other people, administrators and money spenders about, well, now how are we going to spend all this money? How are we going to implement this agenda in the school? How are we going to use these children to further this agenda? Because that's what they really mean. How do you teach anti-racism to the youngest students? Well, how do we get this in there with the younger ones? Because, we've already kind of got it into all the colleges. We got the kids from 18 to 21 nailed. Yep, we're just churning out activists. Nailed. All right, but we need more. We need younger, because you see, when they come to college, there's still a little resistance. They might have learned some values at home. They might be less inclined to unlearn the stuff their parents taught them, and they might be a little resistant to some of these ideas because they're really kind of offensive. I mean, especially if they're white, we can't have that. So let's see, what should we do? I know. Let's go to them when they're really young and impressionable, and they believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and pretty much anything an adult tells them. So that's what we'll do. We'll go to the young ones. They have absolutely no ability to reason with us or think about anything. And instead of teaching them to think and to challenge us, we're just going to fill their little heads full of the ideas we want them to have. That's what we'll do. Yeah. And we'll teach them to be little social justice activists, and it'll be great, and it will benefit our agenda and what we want to do, which is create a collectivist communist utopia. Oh, but don't tell the parents that, because there are probably a few who won't like it. So we're going to tell them that if they don't like this, they're bad. They're racist. They're racist. And if they don't like this, they're actually harming the children. We're not going to tell them how in any meaningful way. We're not going to show them any data. We're just going to assert it as fact. We'll be very certain about it. And every time they try to challenge us and say, show me, we'll just say, you're a racist, and be done with it. That's what we'll do. Yeah, that will work. That's literally what's happening. They're not going to use any of these words, but I'm translating for you, because if you were to get in there to your school and say, can we just take out the how and say why and answer that question for me? And if they come back with they have to be empowered to engage in social justice. At 7, do they really? Like at 7? I can't even get my kid to get the dishes to the sink from the counter. They can't even reach it, actually. But, we're still sort of nailing down the whole tying of shoes thing. We probably stayed with Velcro a little bit long, and, working our way away from the juice box and the sippy cup is a little bit of a challenge still. They don't make their own beds. Yeah, but definitely social justice activists. That's what we need our 7-year-olds to be. What? When did this become their responsibility? When was it the responsibility of any child to do anything but learn and grow and become, a healthy, physically fit, mentally fit adult? That's like their job. That's why they go to school, to have the skills to function individually, independently. So they actually don't need anything from the society, so they can be responsible for themselves. And then when they are, then guess what? They'll have something to give. It being a productive citizen, and also probably polite. So that's what I think. Somebody should say why. Apparently these people say how. And let's look at who is doing that. All right, shall we? Let's look at this article a little more closely. This early educator and woke kindergarten founder, Akia Gross, does a read aloud to their audience. of Mr. Tiger Goes Wild by Peter Brown. In the Read Aloud, Gross talks about respectability politics and liberation for all children, particularly those who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, queer, and trans. Liberation. Are they in jail? Are they enslaved? Knowledge liberates. So even if they were those things, as I said in my last video about Frederick Douglass, knowledge, reading skill, math, numeracy, science, a sense of personal responsibility. These are the things, a love of learning, that liberate. These are things that liberate, not respectability politics or even knowing what all this other stuff is. This doesn't work. But I want to stick around for a moment on this t-shirt she's wearing in front of her young students, all power to the people. So this right here is Angela Davis. Angela Davis, I'm not sure if she still is, but she was a communist with the Black Panthers. She was accused of helping someone escape who was an accused murderer, actually imprisoned murderer. And so that's who she is. And this is a little bit on the history site about it. Educator and activist Angela Davis became known for her involvement in a politically charged murder case in the early 1970s, influenced by her segregated upbringing in Birmingham. So, she had some real bad stuff happen to her, okay? So she became angry, and this was her version of social justice, just so you know. Davis joined the Black Panthers, an all-Black branch of the Communist Party, as a young woman. And she became a professor at UCLA, but fell out of favor with the administration due to her ties. Davis was charged with aiding the botched escape attempt of imprisoned Black radical George Jackson and served roughly 18 months in jail before her acquittal in 1972. After spending time traveling and lecturing, Davis returned to the classroom as professor and authored several books. Okay, well, let's look at what she was talking about in the 1970s. This is 1977. This is Saturday, September 10th, 1977. Now, the date will become relevant in a moment. Statement of Angela Davis to Jim Jones over radio phone patch. This is Angela Davis. I would like to say to my friend Jim Jones and all my sisters and brothers from People's Temple who are in Guyana there, know that there are people here not only in the San Francisco Bay Area, but also across the country who are supporting you, who are with you. I can personally speak for the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Oppression in cities throughout the country, from Birmingham, Alabama, to that there are people who are aware of the contributions of People's Temple to our efforts to, for example, free Reverend Ben Chavis and the Wilmington 10. We know that you've participated and brought people to all marches and demonstrations, and thousands of petitions that have been sent to government officials have been circulated and signed by members of People's Temple. And so we are very deeply obligated to you for what you've done to further the fight for justice, to further the struggle against oppression, to further the fight against racism. Now, Jim Jones was white, and almost all his followers were Black or Asian, mostly Black. I know you're in a very difficult situation right now, and there's a conspiracy, a very profound conspiracy designed to destroy the contributions which you have made to our struggle. And this is why I must tell you that we feel we are under attack as well. When you are attacked, it is because of your progressive stand, and we feel it is directly an attack against us as well. Therefore, more of us need to know that we will be carrying on the idea that we will do everything in our power to ensure your safety and your ability to keep on struggling. In response to loud ovations to hundreds of people with Jim Jones in the Guyana interior, Angela states, I attempted to say, though not very eloquently, that we are with you and we appreciate everything you have done, and we know you're going to win. And in the final analysis, we are all going to win. This was winning. This was winning a little more than a year later for Jim Jones and his followers. Mass suicide. Over 900 people, a third of whom were children. Part of that conspiracy she was talking about were the people who had very serious and obviously legitimate concerns about the things going on at the People's Temple, about the strange sexual practices in particular of Jim Jones, some of them involving children. Remember how they talked about the Branch Davidians, and that was the big issue, and oh my God, they had to raid that and, cause... This is what happened here. This is what happened here. Those who didn't commit suicide were murdered. Those who didn't want to kill their children were murdered along with their children. So I don't know if Angela Davis ever changed her tune, and people are allowed to redeem themselves and apologize and say they were wrong, but this is a picture of her then that this young kindergarten teacher is wearing in front of her students, who might even ask who this is. And I really would love to know what Ms. I don't know what they go by, Gross says to the students. So let's take a look at this. This lovely young lady is Ankita Anjith. She's one of 4 college-age friends who are petitioning the Texas State Board of Education to create an anti-racist American history curriculum. I hope to God they ignore her. She can recall learning about slavery, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks at her Katy, Texas elementary school in the Houston area. So you did learn about the civil rights. But looking back, Anjith, now a student at Northwestern University, also vividly remembers how superficial those conversations were, because that was age appropriate, hun. And how much she wishes that her predominantly white suburban school district had given her the tools from a young age to understand America's racist past and its connection with the present. Maybe that should have happened in, your high school, or maybe even where you are now. And what exactly do you not understand? What do you not understand? What is the deficit that you have, Miss College student at a prestigious college? And you probably grew up in Katy, Texas, predominantly white area. So I'm going to guess you didn't really know a lot of Black people, and yet you're saying like, oh my gosh, I wish they'd taught me about this. Sorry to use the affected voice, but I find this just hilarious. She didn't have something, so now she wants to turn around and say that all these students need to have it. We don't know if they need to have it. Do you know where they are academically? No, you don't. And why is this age appropriate? Maybe there was a reason it was superficial. They taught us things that were easily digestible and sounded good. I suppose they should have been difficult to digest and sounding bad. And just said, it was definitely painted in the light that these problems are all in the past, and America is the land of the free, and everyone is equal here. Well, everyone here is equal under the law. And that is the point to take away from any lesson about the civil rights movement, is that it worked. The civil rights movement was successful, and we are now all equal under the law. That we are. The fact that that is not perfect in its execution every minute of every day, though not necessarily racist either, is not indicative of the fact that we have some deep structural racism. No, it's not. It means we still have some tweaking to do around the margins. But yes, legally we are all equal under the law. And America is the land of the free. It is. You are free. Everyone here is free. I'm not sure what you want to teach people, that they're not free. Everything isn't free. Things cost money. You're not free from all strife and all woe, but you are free and equal under the law. That is true. As far as these problems are in the past, the problem of systemic, institutionalized racism enforced by the law is in the past. That is in the past. You're trying to bring it back, obviously. I realize you have some nostalgia for it, I guess, so you can have another problem to solve, maybe. I don't know. In July, Anjith and 3 of her friends testified before the Texas State Board of Education demanding changes. Who are you to demand anything? To the way students are taught. Are you even a parent? You're not a parent. You're a college student. Who the hell are you to make a demand about how students are taught? What is the negative consequence that you see of the way they are teaching students in Texas? What is happening as far as race relations that you can conclusively tie back to what they're being taught in elementary school? Moreover, what do you think about the fact that so many are coming out of the schools illiterate? Do you think maybe that holds them back a little bit more, that is causing them a little bit more of a problem than the fact that a bunch of white kids in an elementary school in Katy, Texas don't have enough deep, dark, scary conversations in kindergarten about slavery? That's what holds Black people back? I'm pretty sure not. I'm pretty sure they need to read. They are advocating for core curriculum changes in social studies, specifically American history classes. Yes, because if you can teach them that American history is just terrible and awful, they will grow up to hate their country, and it will be much easier for them to throw it away, which is really what you want to do. Dismantle, deconstruct, destruct. That's what you want to do, little robot. The college students pressed the board to acknowledge the state's deep anti-Black racist past. When have they not acknowledged it? Texas has acknowledged it and acknowledged it. I mean, what does acknowledging do? How does acknowledging the racist past close an achievement gap? How does acknowledging anything help these kids learn to read? You want performative stuff. You want people to pat you on the back for being such a good little anti-racist. You have no interest in making sure that these kids learn a damn thing that they actually need to learn. You're not interested in these children at all. You're interested in your little narcissistic self. To them, educators should teach significant topics like 1950s and 1960s civil rights movement with more depth and breadth. Have you ever taken a child development class? Do you know what breadth and depth an elementary school kid is capable of in these topics? No, you don't. And you need to have a certain context. I didn't really fully understand the civil rights movement until college. Do you know why? Because I had to first learn about history in depth, and I hadn't. They hadn't taught me just regular old history of the Constitution and understanding my rights well enough in high school. Even though I went to an elite high school, I still had to learn more about it. So how about we go back to teaching the basics of what are your rights, what does the Bill of Rights say, et cetera, and so forth in high schools in this country, and then we can worry about, while we're doing that, making sure how the civil rights fits into that. But kindergarten? Talk about out of context. They believe that kids, no matter what grade they are in, should learn history through an anti-racist lens. It's a very tiny little lens. Doesn't see anything other than black people are oppressed and white people are oppressors. Not only learning about the role of white supremacy and racism in history, but doing so in a way that empowers them to pursue social justice. So you learn about their history, but now we need to pursue social justice. Implication, it hasn't been achieved. It needs to be constantly pursued by every single solitary individual child. They need to pursue social justice. If each and every one of them knows how to stick up for him or herself, if each and every one of them is empowered with the basic skills to succeed, reading, writing, numeracy, etc., they will individually fight for the social justice in their life. And if they're all doing it simultaneously, I'm pretty sure we'll get there. We'll get there a lot quicker than teaching them to be angry and sad and scared of each other, of the world. And in the meantime, not spending their time learning to read and write and do all that other stuff. And they aren't the only ones advocating the adoption of such curricula. Ever since the police killing of George Floyd, in Minneapolis in late May spurred what may be the largest social movement in U.S. history. I don't think so. Education leaders have started to reckon with how to comprehensively teach history with an anti-racism lens. Colleges are holding professional development online events for educators on how to reimagine education with racial justice in mind. And school districts are working to expand their curricula on race. So why are they in such a panic? There's only one answer. Because they still believe the false narrative that George Floyd was killed because of his race. There is literally no evidence of that, but they seized upon this, all these grifters and sellers of books and curricula and speeches and, activism GoFundMe pages. They seized on this to make that the narrative. People have not questioned it. It's like hands up, don't shoot, which never happened either. And they're using it to reimagine education as if that would change anything. As if only all of our students have been taught that there are oppressors and oppressed, and there's black people and white people. You need to be very conscious of your race 24 hours a day. Oh my God. Okay. That somehow George Floyd would be alive. Nope. It's just not true. As education organizations and initiatives such as Teaching Tolerance, the Zinn Education Project, communist, Black Lives Matter at School, communist, the Pulitzer Center's 1619 Project Curriculum, Nicole Hannah-Jones is a liar, and others strive to give educators the tools they're paid to. They're strive to get those tools out there quick enough before people figure out what charlatans they are and stop paying them. To sell the tools to teach anti-bias and anti-racism, educators are grappling with how to implement these resources in early grades. They're grappling. Oh my God. Apparently it's escaped their notice that the kids can't read. But they're grappling with the social justice stuff. Can you grapple a little more with the reading curriculum? Math too, maybe? That'd be good. For Katie Cryan Leary, the principal of the newly opened Magnolia Elementary in Seattle Public Schools, creating an anti-racist, anti-bias school can be a messy, uncomfortable journey. That's especially true in a district that in the 19 years she's been working there has committed to racial equity, but still struggles to serve the needs of a wide range of students because you're focusing on the wrong things. You're struggling to meet their needs because you are literally fixated on your own virtue signaling and not on their learning, not on what they actually need. Okay? If you're struggling to serve their needs, maybe it's time to take a step back and figure out what their needs are. Not this garbage. I still see so many issues where our walk is not matching the talk, said Leary, who is white and leads a school where she says 62% of students are white. So what are the little white students doing wrong? What are they doing wrong? That the school is that this is Seattle. These are some of the most progressive people on planet Earth. Are you trying to tell me that the most progressive people on planet Earth who are white are racist? Are they behaving in a racist manner? What is it exactly they're doing that is not walking the walk? What's happening? Give us some specifics. To her, anti-racism education in elementary school starts with students' awareness of themselves, of others, and how those interactions play out. She believes that social emotional learning, giving kids the tool to manage and express their feelings, is the heart of race and equity work. It's also the heart of making little boys feel like garbage. Not every child expresses themselves verbally, and we just express our emotions and work out our feelings. No, some people don't want to do that. I'm female. I didn't want to sit and express my feelings at school. I'm introverted. It put me into a terribly stressful situation. I wanted to learn. I wanted to pursue the things I was interested in, and this gobbledygook would have driven me out of my freaking mind. It would have driven me crazy. I did not want to sit around in circle time and share my feelings, and I can almost guarantee you that most of the little boys there don't, and if that sounds sexist to you, too damn bad. I was a classroom teacher in K through 3 primarily, and I can tell you this is not what is of interest to them, and forcing them to do this kind of stuff is really, really selfish. It's really self-involved on the part of these teachers. They are not meeting their needs because you're not meeting their needs. Developmental psychologists have called attention to the notion. Let's highlight that word, notion. It's a notion. It's not proven at all. That children between the ages of 2 and 4 can start showing racial bias. This lie needs to die. Ibram X. Kendi has just pushed this lie out there, and people are picking up on it. And this ages of 2 and 4, I've shown you on this channel how that is not true. That is false. They do not show racial biases. There is a tiny split second bit time where they recognize faces, okay, where they more quickly recognize faces of the same race than those that are not. That is not a racial bias. It's probably a survival skill. It's probably biological, and it probably goes away after a certain age. But when you're talking about kids who are literally physically dependent on adults for their survival, that's probably a survival skill. Oh, P.S., the study was only done with white children. Oh, P.S., there was no control group. I mean, there's so many things wrong with the study, and to call it a bias, like a cognitive bias, they don't have that level of ability yet. And by the time students are in kindergarten, research shows that they show some of the same attitudes about race as the adults in their lives. Well, again, if the adults in their lives are progressive, if the adults in their lives are not racist, then they're showing biases and attitudes that are not racist. So I think you maybe need to talk to the adults, and you need to be specific. Are you seeing racist behaviors, or do you just say, oh no, they're going to act like their parents? Yes, that happens. That does happen. And it happens amongst Black children too. It happens amongst Asian children too. This is not unique to white children. And unless you have a specific allegation about the white children and the white parents being racist, maybe you need to just shut up and butt your nose out of their business. Leary uses resources from Black Lives Matter School. Oh, I bet she does. A national movement started by thousands of educators in Seattle in 2008 that spread to large school districts nationwide. For the past 4 years, district leaders have strongly encouraged Seattle public school educators to teach about the Black Lives Matter movement's 13 guiding principles. We've gone over those 13 guiding principles. Remember how the nuclear family is, nah, that's a bad idea. And oh, when we need to, elevate trans people. And it is explicitly Marxist, explicitly anti-American, explicitly anti-family, explicitly anti-individual. What more do you need to know? Oh, we need to push this into the schools. Why do we? These are public schools paid for with tax dollars. Tax dollars. I'm just skipping some of this, okay? In our classrooms, it's a safe space where kids know and trust and are connected to their teachers, Leary said. But that's not always the case with online discussions. So we struggle with that, and we have had conversations about it as a staff. We need to keep having conversations. Oh, my God. When kids come to school, we have the opportunity to create a culture of school that may be different than their home culture. This is their nice way of saying, we want you to unlearn what you learned at home. This is what Gabrielle Clark was talking about. They made him explicitly declare what he was going to unlearn that he learned at home. They are telling you, parents, in no uncertain terms, they plan to indoctrinate your children. They want to get between you and your kids, and whatever you're teaching them at home, good, bad, or indifferent, they want to be the primary values instructor in your child's life. We have the capacity to create anti-racist kids at school, whether they live in an anti-racist home or not. And we don't have the ability remotely. And so we're working as a start to find out how to do that. Well, I think you ought to turn off the computer and homeschool. That's how I think you ought to deal with that. Chanita Coulter, a preschool teacher. Now we're talking about 4 and 5-year-olds. In Charleston, South Carolina, also believes in the importance of having open discussions with young students and not shying away from current events. When I was teaching, if I'd had a conversation about current events with young preschool children, I can guarantee you I would have been fired. Guaranteed. Guaranteed I would have been fired. And I should have been fired. You have no idea where these kids are at psychologically. You don't know what's going on at home. You don't know what's affecting them. This is none of your damn business. They are not ready for this. This is over their heads. I think young children are very, very smart. I think they can learn at a higher level than we ask them to when it comes to reading, writing, and math. I think it is our obligation as teachers to follow their lead, to see what they're curious about and help them explore that so they love to learn. If we impose ourselves on them and impose our sense of obligation and what we think they ought to owe to the society on them, we are crushing them psychologically, taking away their sense of hope, taking away their own curiosity. We're indoctrinating them. They are no better than little cult members. This is just insane. Our children, even though they are very young, they are aware of what's going on, Coulter said. I remember, like, even my younger students, maybe like 4 or 5 years old, they were aware of who Trayvon Martin was and what happened to him. That's a really difficult topic. I think maybe you should talk to your parents about that. Let's go play. They're 4 and 5. I'm really curious. Did you discuss how Trayvon was bashing George Zimmerman's head into the sidewalk when he was shot? Did you tell him that he was murdered in cold blood by George Zimmerman and he looked just like them? Did you traumatize them with how you translated this information to them, or did you just refer them back to their parents like you should have done? Microaggressions, implicit bias, systemic racism, and other barriers can hinder students' learning. No, they can't. That's in your imagination. That's in your imagination. They also talk to educators about how, remember, I showed it to you in my last video. Frederick Douglass was literally a slave. I would call that a macroaggression. Yeah, I would call that a macro. I would call having his teacher, his master's wife, his mistress, being told in front of him that it was wrong to educate him. I think that was probably a macroaggression. I'm going to go with macro, not micro. And he was also whipped and other kinds of things. Yeah, he was a slave. It didn't hinder his learning. This is a lie. This is exactly the point that I was making in my last video. All these little microaggressions they're looking for, and of course, teaching the students to look for, that hinders their learning. They're so busy looking for the problems and nursing wounds and nursing hurts and grievances. They don't learn how to be grateful. They don't learn how to be curious. They don't even learn about their own personal power to learn to read, and that is freedom, just like Frederick Douglass said. That's what makes a man unfit for slavery, is learning. This stuff hinders learning. A lot of times people hear the word activism and they might have a negative connotation to it. We try to provide enlightenment in that regard. No, there's no enlightenment. It's a negative connotation because it doesn't belong in a preschool classroom. Period. I'm not reading to the end of this. You get the point. And as with most of my videos, my point is to educate you and raise your awareness as to why is this bad. If you're sitting there going like, okay, I kind of know instinctively it sounds gross, but like exactly why? What are the questions I should be asking? What are the things that I should be doing? We should be pushing back on these premises is what you should be doing. How do you teach anti-racism? You don't. Don't be ashamed to say that. If you're a parent, don't be ashamed to say that. Don't be ashamed to think it. You're not fragile. You're strong. You're defending your child. You're defending their integrity. You're defending their curiosity. You're defending their mind. Quite literally. And its ability to learn. This is poison. So, if you found this useful, helpful, informative, I hope you will subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment on the video, share the video. That's the video.